The knock came at midnight, soft, desperate, and wrong. Jacob Thornton had lived alone on the High Ridge Ranch for 3 years, ever since Sarah passed. In all that time, not a single soul had knocked on his door past sundown. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, midnight visitors meant one thing: trouble. He reached for the rifle above the mantel, his calloused hand steady despite the racing of his heart. The knock came again, lighter this time, almost a scratching sound. Not the fist of a man, not the urgent pounding of someone running from danger. A child's knock. Jacob's blood ran cold. There were no children for miles. The Hendersons' place was 15 miles south, and their youngest was grown. The Peterson family had moved to California last spring. He cracked the door open, rifle at the ready, and looked down. A little girl stood on his porch, maybe 7 years old, her dress torn and muddy, her feet bare and bleeding. Her eyes were wide with terror, and tears had carved clean paths through the dirt on her face. "Please, mister," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mama needs help. They're hurting her. Please. They said they'd kill her if she screamed again." Jacob's world tilted. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. But a child was begging for help, and somewhere in the darkness, a woman was in danger. He made a decision that would change everything. "Come inside," he said, already reaching for his coat. "Tell me everything." Jacob pulled the girl inside and bolted the door, his mind racing through possibilities, each darker than the last. He set the rifle within reach and knelt before her, trying to gentle his voice despite the urgency clawing at his chest. "What's your name, child?" "Emma," she whispered, trembling. "Emma Carlyle." The name meant nothing to him. Jacob had made it his business to know every family within a day's ride, and no Carlyles lived anywhere near High Ridge. He studied the girl more carefully. Her dress was well made despite the damage, the kind of garment a family with means would buy. But her feet told a different story. Bloodied, cut, as if she'd run for miles through rough country. "Where's your mama, Emma? How far did you walk?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "It was dark. I ran and ran. They were yelling, and Mama told me to run and not look back. And I heard." Her voice broke into tears. Jacob felt something crack inside his chest. He'd seen Sarah cry only once, when their stillborn son had been buried in the cold ground behind the house. This child's tears carried that same weight of impossible grief. "Easy now," he said, grabbing a blanket from the chair and wrapping it around her shoulders. He moved to the kitchen, pouring water from the pitcher and cutting a piece of cornbread left from supper. "You eat this while I tend your feet. Then we'll go help your mama." As he cleaned and wrapped her torn feet with strips of cloth, Emma told her story between bites and sobs. Her family had been traveling from Denver to San Francisco. Her father had business there. They'd hired a guide in Black Rock, a man named Cutter who came recommended by the hotel owner. 3 days into the journey, Cutter's 2 brothers had appeared at their camp. Her father had become suspicious and reached for his gun. They'd shot him dead before he could draw. Jacob's jaw clenched. He knew of men like these, vultures who preyed on travelers, especially those who looked like they carried money. The vast emptiness of the frontier swallowed countless victims every year. "They took Mama to an old cabin," Emma continued, her voice hollow now, shock settling in. "Said they'd search for Papa's bank papers. When Mama wouldn't tell them where the money was hidden, they started hitting her. One of them grabbed me, but Mama bit him and he dropped me. She screamed for me to run, so I ran. I ran until I saw your lights." Jacob stood and walked to the window, peering into the darkness. His ranch sat on a rise, and on clear nights you could see for miles. Tonight, clouds obscured the moon, turning the world into an ocean of black. The girl could have come from any direction, but she'd mentioned an old cabin. There were dozens of abandoned structures scattered across this territory, remnants of failed homesteads, played-out mining claims, and trappers' shelters from bygone years. But within running distance of a 7-year-old child, that narrowed it considerably. "Emma," he said, turning back, "think carefully. When you ran from the cabin, did you run uphill or downhill?" She thought for a moment, her brow furrowing. Down. It was hard because it was steep and I kept sliding. And before you saw my ranch lights, did you cross any water? A creek or stream? Yes. I fell in it. The water was so cold. Jacob's mind locked onto a location. Deadman's Creek, about 4 miles northeast. There was an old trapper's cabin there, built into the hillside. He'd sheltered there once during a blizzard years ago. It was isolated, hidden from the main trails, perfect for men who didn't want to be found. He began moving with purpose, lighting every lantern in the house. He set them in the windows, turning his home into a beacon against the night. If Emma had gotten lost and circled back, or if others were searching, they'd find their way here. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, fear creeping into her voice again. "Making sure anyone who needs to find this place can," Jacob replied, loading his rifle and checking his revolver. He grabbed his gun belt and buckled it on, then pulled down Sarah's old medical kit from the shelf. If Emma's mother was still alive, she'd likely need tending. He turned to the girl, his weathered face set with grim determination. "Emma, I need you to be brave a while longer. I'm going to get your mama, but you need to stay here. If anyone comes to the door except me, you hide in the cellar. You understand? The trapdoor's under that rug there. Don't leave me," she begged, fresh tears starting. "I'm not leaving you, child. I'm going to bring your mama back. But I can move faster alone, and I need to know you're safe." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Can you do that for me?" She nodded, though her whole body shook with fear. Jacob grabbed one more lantern and headed for the door, stepping into a darkness that held unknown dangers, and a woman running out of time. Jacob saddled Storm, his strongest horse, with practiced efficiency despite the urgency burning in his veins. The big roan sensed his tension and snorted nervously, stamping in the corral. 3 years alone had made Jacob careful, methodical. Sarah had always said he thought too much. But tonight, calculation might mean the difference between saving a life and riding into a grave. 3 men. At least 1 woman possibly injured. Unknown weapons, unknown positioning, and the advantage of fortification. Every tactical consideration screamed that he should ride to town for the sheriff, gather a posse, come back with force and numbers. But that was 6 hours minimum, and Emma's mother didn't have 6 hours. He mounted up and urged Storm northeast, letting the horse find the path through the darkness while he kept the lantern raised high. The light wouldn't reach far, but it was enough to avoid the worst of the brush and rock. 20 years in this country had taught him to navigate by feel, by the whisper of wind through different types of grass, by the way the ground shifted beneath him. As he rode, Jacob's mind drifted to Sarah. She'd been a teacher before they married, educated and refined. Everything the crude frontier wasn't. She'd come west with her father, a circuit preacher who'd caught pneumonia and died within a year. Jacob had offered marriage as much from practical concern as affection, but love had grown between them like wildflowers after rain. Unexpected, resilient, beautiful. Then came the hard pregnancy, the stillbirth, the fever that followed. He'd ridden through a blizzard for the doctor, but by the time they returned, she was gone. 3 years had passed, but grief remained his constant companion. Maybe that's why he couldn't turn away from Emma's plea. He'd failed to save Sarah, failed to protect their child. This woman, this stranger suffering in the darkness. Perhaps saving her could balance some cosmic ledger in his soul. The sound of Deadman's Creek reached his ears, the burble of water over stone. He dismounted, tied Storm to a cottonwood, and killed the lantern. From here, he'd go on foot. Stealth mattered more than speed now. The cabin sat another quarter-mile upstream, tucked against the hillside. Jacob moved like a ghost through the scrub pine and sage, his rifle at ready position. Years of hunting had taught him to step where the earth wouldn't betray him, avoiding dried branches, testing his weight before committing to each step. Then he saw it, a thin line of yellow light leaking through the gaps in the cabin's shutters. He crept closer, circling to approach from the blind side where no windows faced out. Voices drifted through the night air, rough and cruel. "Telling you, Cutter, she don't know nothing. We've been at this for hours. That voice was younger, uncertain. Shut up, Luke. A harder voice, cold as winter stone. Rich folks always got secrets. That banker in BlackRock said Carlyle was carrying papers worth $5,000. 5,000. That's our stake to California, boys. We just got to persuade the lady to remember where her husband hid them. A woman's voice, weak but defiant. I told you. The papers burned. When you shot the wagon horses, everything burned. The sound of a slap echoed through the night, followed by a cry of pain. Jacob's hands tightened on the rifle until his knuckles went white. He forced himself to remain calm, to think. Rage got men killed. He crept to the single window on the side wall and peered through a gap in the shutter. 3 men, as Emma had said. One stood by the door, a rail-thin man with a nervous habit of shifting his weight, the youngest of them. Another sat at a crude table, cleaning a revolver with deliberate care, the dangerous one, the thinker. That would be Cutter. The third, a bearish man with arms like tree trunks, stood over a woman tied to a chair. Her face was bruised and bloodied, but her eyes blazed with fury and pain. Catherine Carlyle, he presumed. She'd fought them hard and was still fighting. Jacob counted guns. 2 visible revolvers, a rifle leaning against the fireplace. 3 men, 1 door, 1 window on the front wall. No good way to take them all at once without risking the woman. Then he noticed something that changed everything. A kerosene lamp sitting on the table near Cutter, and beyond it, a shelf holding 2 more lamps and a can of kerosene. These men had dragged supplies into their temporary hideout, probably planning to stay until they broke their prisoner or decided to kill her. Fire. It was a devil's bargain, but Jacob had run out of good options. He retreated silently, circling to where Storm waited. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a bottle of whiskey, Sarah's medicine for winter colds, and tore strips from an old shirt. He'd done this once before, years ago, smoking out a mountain lion from a den. Tonight, he'd smoke out worse predators. Jacob Thornton was about to start a fire in hell. The plan formed in Jacob's mind with cold clarity. Create chaos, exploit confusion, save the woman. Simple in concept, deadly in execution. One mistake and they'd all end up dead in this forgotten place. Bones picked clean by scavengers before anyone found them. He circled to the back of the cabin where the chimney rose from the hillside. The structure was ancient, built by trappers decades ago and abandoned when the beaver played out. The chimney was stone, the roof old timber and sod. Dry as tinder after the long summer. Jacob stuffed the whiskey-soaked cloth into the bottle's neck, leaving a tail hanging out. He'd need to move fast once he lit it. The fire would spread, but not instantly. He needed the smoke first, needed confusion before commitment. He struck a match, touched it to the cloth, and the moment it caught, hurled the bottle onto the roof. Glass shattered. Flames spread across the dry timber like liquid gold. Within seconds, smoke began to pour down the chimney and through the gaps in the old roof. Jacob sprinted to the front of the cabin, pressing himself against the wall beside the door. Shouting erupted inside. What the hell? The roof's on fire. Forget the roof. Grab the woman. The door slammed open and the bear-like man emerged, dragging Catherine Carlyle. She was still tied to the chair, trying to resist despite her injuries. Jacob stepped forward and swung his rifle stock in a vicious arc, catching the big man across the temple. He dropped like a felled ox, and Catherine tumbled sideways, chair and all. Stay down. Jacob barked at her, leveling his rifle at the doorway. The thin one, Luke, came next, coughing, eyes streaming from smoke. He had his gun drawn but couldn't see through the tears. Jacob's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed, screaming, his revolver flying into the darkness. Then Cutter appeared, and Jacob knew immediately he'd miscalculated. This one was smart, disciplined. Instead of rushing blindly through the door, he'd grabbed the rifle and stayed low, using the doorframe for cover. Smoke billowed around him like a demon emerging from hell. Drop it! Cutter shouted, and Jacob saw why. The man had his revolver aimed not at Jacob, but at Catherine, still helpless on the ground. Drop the rifle or I kill her right now. Jacob's mind raced. The fire was spreading fast. In minutes, the whole structure would collapse. But if he surrendered, they'd all die anyway. Cutter would shoot them both and take his chances with the flames. You kill her, you lose your leverage, Jacob called back. And then you're just a dead man in a burning building. Maybe, Cutter said. His voice eerily calm despite the inferno growing behind him. But she'll still be dead. And from the way you're standing there, I'd say you care about that. So drop the rifle. The smoke was thickening, obscuring vision. Jacob could hear the crackle of flames consuming the old wood, could feel the heat building. In moments, the roof would collapse. Then Catherine did something extraordinary. Despite being bound, despite her injuries, she rolled chair and all into Cutter's legs. It wasn't much, barely knocked him off balance, but it was enough. His gun swung downward for just a heartbeat. Jacob's rifle spoke first. The bullet caught Cutter in the chest, slamming him backward into the burning cabin. He fell among the flames, and his screaming lasted only seconds before the smoke took him. Jacob rushed to Catherine, pulling his knife to cut her bonds. Can you walk? I can run if it means getting away from here, she gasped, her voice raw from smoke and screaming. He hauled her to her feet, and they staggered away from the inferno. Behind them, the cabin's roof collapsed with a thunderous roar, sending a pillar of sparks spiraling into the night sky. The big man Jacob had struck lay unconscious, dangerously close to the spreading flames. Against every instinct of vengeance, Jacob grabbed him and dragged him away. He wouldn't leave even a murdering bastard to burn alive. Luke was crawling away, still clutching his shattered shoulder, sobbing. Jacob retrieved the man's fallen revolver and tucked it into his belt. These two would face a judge and a rope, but they'd face it legally. Catherine collapsed against a tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. In the firelight, Jacob could see the full extent of her injuries. Bruises darkening her face, blood matting her hair, her dress torn and filthy. But her eyes were alert, aware, alive. My daughter, she whispered. Emma, did you see? She's safe, Jacob said quickly. She came to my ranch. She's the one who told me you were here. She's waiting for you. Catherine's face crumpled, and she began to weep. Not from pain or fear, but from relief so overwhelming it broke through all her defenses. Jacob looked away, giving her privacy in her moment of vulnerability, while behind them, the cabin burned like a funeral pyre for the wicked. Dawn broke cold and gray as they made their way back to the ranch. Catherine rode storm, swaying with exhaustion despite Jacob's arms steadying her from behind. The two surviving outlaws walked ahead, hands bound with rope, Luke still whimpering from his shoulder wound while the big man, who'd given his name as Garrett, trudged along in sullen silence. Jacob had field-dressed Luke's injury as best he could, packing it with clean cloth from his saddlebag. The bullet had gone clean through, missing bone. He'd lived to hang, which seemed appropriate enough. Garrett had a concussion that left him dazed and occasionally stumbling. But Jacob showed no mercy, prodding him onward with the rifle barrel whenever he slowed. As they walked, Catherine told him everything. How she and her husband Richard had been traveling with their life savings converted to bearer bonds, hidden in a leather document case. How Cutter had seemed trustworthy at first, knowledgeable about the trails, respectful. How everything had changed when his brothers appeared at their camp that second night. Richard knew immediately something was wrong, she said, her voice distant with memory. He'd been a banker for 20 years, he understood predators. He told me to run with Emma if anything happened. I should have listened. I should have grabbed her and run the moment those men appeared. But I thought if we just cooperated. Can't live on should have, Jacob said quietly. I've learned that the hard way. You survived. Emma survived. That's what matters. The document case was in Richard's coat, Catherine continued. When they shot him, his body fell on the campfire. Everything burned, the coat, the papers, everything. $5,000 in bearer bonds, just ash. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't believe me. They kept saying Richard must have hidden it, Must have had a second case, something. They wouldn't accept that it was simply gone. Greed blinds men, Jacob observed. Makes them see treasure where there's only smoke. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and Jacob watched Catherine's posture gradually stiffen with pain. She'd been beaten, terrorized for hours, then dragged through a rescue that involved fire and gunplay. Only adrenaline had kept her moving through the night, and now that adrenaline was fading, leaving only hurt. "How much farther?" she asked through clenched teeth. "About an hour," Jacob replied. "Can you make it?" "I'll make it if I have to crawl. Emma needs to see that I'm alive." They crested the final rise, and High Ridge Ranch appeared below, bathed in morning sunlight. The lanterns had burned out, but their windows still stood like welcoming eyes. And on the porch, small and patient, sat Emma Carlyle. The girl spotted them immediately. For a heartbeat she froze, disbelieving. Then she screamed, "Mama!" and launched herself off the porch, running with desperate speed up the hill. Jacob halted Storm and helped Catherine dismount. She managed 3 steps before her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees in the dirt. But Emma reached her, crashed into her arms, and they clung to each other, sobbing with the raw emotion of people who'd thought they'd never meet again. Jacob turned away, giving them privacy, and found his own eyes burning with unexpected tears. He'd forgotten what it looked like when prayers were answered, when the impossible turned possible, when death released its grip and let the living remain living. "Get moving," he growled at the prisoners, prodding them toward the ranch house. They had no sympathy in their hearts for the reunion behind them. Inside the house, Jacob secured Garrett and Luke to the heavy support beam in the center of the main room, binding them thoroughly. Luke had passed out from pain, which was a mercy. Garrett just stared at the floor, the fight gone out of him. Jacob stepped back onto the porch and found Catherine and Emma slowly making their way to the house, arms wrapped around each other. Catherine looked like she might collapse at any moment, but determination kept her moving. "The spare bedroom's ready," Jacob said. "Emma slept there a few hours last night. You should rest, both of you. I'll ride to town for the sheriff." "Please don't leave yet," Catherine said. "I know you need to, but just a few minutes. Let me sit down. Let me hold my daughter. Let me feel safe for a moment." Jacob nodded. "Take all the time you need, ma'am. Those men aren't going anywhere." Inside, he prepared coffee and the last of the cornbread while Catherine and Emma settled on the old couch Sarah had loved. They sat pressed together, whispering to each other, occasionally crying, sometimes laughing. The strange alchemy of emotions that follows survival. Jacob watched them from the kitchen, and for the first time in 3 years, his house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. The dead would always be dead, and grief would always wait in the shadows. But life, stubborn, precious, miraculous life, still won sometimes. The sheriff arrived by mid-afternoon with 2 deputies, their horses lathered from hard riding. Word of the burned cabin and captured outlaws had spread fast. Smoke visible for miles had drawn curious homesteaders, and Jacob's brief stop at the Peterson place to send word had set tongues wagging across the territory. Sheriff Tom Brennan was a weathered man in his 60s, more politician than lawman these days, but he'd been a Texas Ranger once upon a time. He still carried that authority in his bearing as he surveyed the trussed-up prisoners. "Jacob Thornton," he said, shaking his head with something between admiration and exasperation. 3 years you live quiet as a church mouse, then suddenly you're burning down cabins and capturing outlaws like it's the old days." "Wasn't planning on it," Jacob replied, "but a child knocked on my door at midnight, and a woman needed help. Didn't have much choice about the rest." Brennan questioned everyone, Emma first, gentle with the traumatized girl. Then Catherine, who recounted the entire nightmare in a steady voice that occasionally cracked with emotion. Jacob told his part with sparse efficiency, leaving out nothing but adding no embellishments. The deputies examined Garrett's head wound and Luke's shoulder, pronouncing both men fit enough for a jail cell. "The third one?" Brennan asked. "This cutter. Burned in the cabin," Jacob said flatly. "He had a gun on Mrs. Carlyle. I didn't have a choice." Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fair shooting from what I'm hearing. These men are wanted in 3 territories. Gang's been preying on travelers for 2 years now. There's rewards posted. Probably amount to $300–400 total. Catherine looked up sharply. That money should go to Mr. Thornton. He saved our lives. The law will sort it out proper, Brennan assured her. But I expect you're right, ma'am. Now, about your husband's body, we'll need to recover it for proper burial. And you'll need to give statements in town, though that can wait a few days till you're stronger. After the sheriff departed with his prisoners, a strange quiet settled over the ranch. Emma had finally fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted beyond endurance. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing. You should rest too, Jacob suggested. I can't, she whispered. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that cabin. I hear the sound of them hitting me. I see Richard falling. I see Emma running into the darkness, and I don't know if she'll survive. And I can't do anything but pray to a God I'm not sure is listening. Jacob pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The images fade, he said quietly. Not completely, not ever, but they fade. I know. Catherine looked at him then, really looked, seeing past the weathered rancher to the man beneath. You've known grief. My wife, Sarah, 3 years ago, died in childbirth, along with our son. The words came easier now than they once had, though they still carried weight. Afterward, I thought about leaving this place. Too many memories. But I realized memories were all I had left of her. Leaving wouldn't make the grief lighter, just make me lonelier. How did you survive it? One day at a time, one sunrise, one sunset, working until my body was too tired to think. And eventually the days became bearable, then occasionally good. I won't lie to you, it never goes back to how it was before. But you learn to carry it. And you've got Emma. That makes all the difference. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I keep thinking about how close I came to losing her. If she hadn't found you, if you hadn't believed her, if you hadn't come. But she did, and I did. And you're both alive. Jacob reached across the table and briefly squeezed her hand. A gesture of comfort, nothing more. Don't torture yourself with what might have been. Trust me, that road leads nowhere good. They sat in companionable silence as the afternoon light slanted through the windows. Outside, storm grazed peacefully, and a hawk circled lazily overhead, and the world continued turning as it always did, indifferent to human suffering and human survival alike. What will you do now? Jacob asked eventually. Still planning on San Francisco? Catherine shook her head slowly. I don't know. The money's gone. Richard's business contacts were all connected to those bearer bonds. We have nothing, just what we're wearing and whatever the law recovers from the outlaw's belongings. I have family back in Boston, but going back feels like admitting defeat, like Richard died for nothing. He died protecting his family, Jacob said firmly. There's honor in that. Purpose. It wasn't for nothing. Catherine looked at him with something like gratitude, and in that moment, Jacob saw the beginning of something he hadn't expected to see again. The possibility of a future that wasn't written entirely in the past. Catherine and Emma stayed at the ranch for a week while Catherine recovered and arrangements were made. Richard Carlyle was buried in the High Ridge Cemetery. A simple ceremony attended by Jacob, the sheriff, and a handful of neighbors who'd heard the story. Emma stood between her mother and Jacob, holding both their hands, her small face grave beyond her years. The circuit judge came through town and declared the shooting of Cutter justified, the capture of his accomplices heroic, and awarded Jacob the full reward money, $420. He tried to give it to Catherine, but she refused. You earned it, she insisted. Emma and I have enough for now. The sheriff recovered Richard's pocket watch and my grandmother's brooch from the outlaw's belongings. We can sell those if we need to. This is yours. But Jacob had been thinking, and the thoughts had crystallized into something resembling a plan. What if neither of us kept it? He suggested. What if we invested it? Catherine frowned, puzzled. Invested how? This ranch runs 200 head of cattle, and I manage it alone. It's not easy, and I can't expand because I'm at my limit. But with help, with a partner, it could support twice that many. Maybe 3 times. The grazing land extends for miles. I just can't work it all. Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. You're offering us a place here. I'm offering a partnership, Jacob clarified. You and Emma aren't charity cases. Richard Carlyle was a banker. That means you understand numbers, accounts, business. I'm good with cattle and land, but I'm terrible with the business side. Sarah used to handle that, and since she passed, I've barely kept ahead of expenses. With your help on the business end and the reward money for investment capital, we could build something real here. Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling ranch land. Emma appeared in the doorway, having listened to the entire conversation with a child's uncanny ability to be present when adults thought they were alone. Would we live here? Emma asked. In this house. Jacob hadn't thought that far ahead, but he did now. The house has 4 bedrooms, he said. I only use one. You and your mother could have your own rooms. Or, he paused, considering. There's a good site down by the creek. We could build a second house there. Close enough for working the ranch, far enough for privacy. That would take months, Catherine said. Where would we stay while it was being built? Here, Jacob said simply. If you're comfortable with that. If not, there's space in town, though it would make the partnership harder. Emma walked to her mother and tugged her sleeve. I like it here, Mama. It feels safe. Catherine looked down at her daughter, and Jacob saw the war playing out across her face. Grief for the life they'd lost, fear of the unknown, practical concerns about propriety and reputation, and beneath it all, a desperate desire to give Emma stability and safety. It's not a decision you need to make right now, Jacob said quickly. Take time. Think about it. I'm not going anywhere. But Catherine shook her head. No. I've learned that waiting for the perfect moment just means waiting forever. Richard and I waited years to make our move west, and when we finally did, we lost him. I won't waste more time being cautious. She turned to face Jacob squarely. We accept. Partnership. Equal investment from the reward money and my business knowledge. Fair wages for work performed. Legal contracts drawn up proper. And separate houses. I won't have people talking about Emma growing up in improper circumstances. Jacob felt a smile tug at his lips. The first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. Fair enough. We'll have the lawyer in town draw up the papers. They shook hands on it, formal and proper, sealing a bargain that would change all their lives. The following months transformed High Ridge Ranch. Jacob hired 2 ranch hands with the reward money and began expanding operations. Catherine took over the accounts and discovered that Jacob had been undercharging for his cattle by nearly 20%. Within a month, she'd renegotiated contracts with buyers in 3 territories. Emma bloomed like a desert flower after rain. She helped with the chickens, learned to ride a gentle mare Jacob bought especially for her, and slowly the haunted look faded from her eyes. She still had nightmares, and there were days when she wouldn't let Catherine out of her sight. But Jacob had been right. The images faded. Not completely, never completely, but enough. By winter, they'd broken ground on the new house. By spring, its frame stood tall against the sky. And by the following summer, Catherine and Emma moved into their own home, built on land they now co-owned, part of a life they were building together. Not as charity cases or victims, but as partners and survivors. 5 years later, High Ridge Ranch ran 600 head of cattle across 2,000 acres, employed 8 full-time ranch hands, and had contracts with buyers from Denver to San Francisco. Catherine managed the business with sharp intelligence and tireless energy, while Jacob ran the ranch operations with quiet competence. Emma grew into a confident young woman who could rope a steer, balance account books, and quote Shakespeare with equal skill. A true daughter of both the frontier and civilization. She called Jacob Uncle Jake, and he taught her everything he'd once dreamed of teaching his own child. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Jacob and Catherine would sit on the porch of the main house, the one Jacob still lived in, and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. They'd talk about cattle prices and the new hands and whether to invest in barbed wire fencing. But sometimes they'd talk about other things. About Sarah and Richard, about the children they'd lost and the children they'd saved, about how life had a strange way of offering second chances when you least expected them. They never married. Some folks in town found that scandalous, but most understood that some partnerships transcended traditional definitions. They were family in the ways that mattered, bound by survival and struggle, by shared purpose and mutual respect. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled like wolves and the darkness pressed close, Jacob would sometimes remember a midnight knock and a desperate child's voice. "Mama needs help." He'd lit every lantern that night, turning his home into a beacon against the dark. It was still burning,